The subject for today's talk is shamanic entrepreneurship, shamanic entrepreneurship and new paradigm business as a vehicle for rebirthing humanity. So what I want to do here is basically attempt to transmit a kind of soul activating download of my particular mental map of this subject in a way that is activating for you. So I invite you to open yourself to receive this transmission and to weigh everything I say against the against your own soul, and really take what is useful and resonant for you right now at this point in your path, and let go of whatever is not. And if anyone wants to turn on their cameras, feel free. Feel a little bit like I'm talking to myself here. But okay, so launching into things. So we are presently in the midst of an unprecedented global shakeup, a kind of collective rite of passage, a collective ego death with this coronavirus situation that has emerged. I often like to say that life itself is like slow release ayahuasca. And at the moment, it really feels like we're kind of going through a global ayahuasca ceremony, in the sense that life is slow release ayahuasca, in the sense that it will find creative ways to bring all of our stuff to the surface, all of our shadows and everything we don't want to look at. And yeah, whether we like it or not, this is just what life does over time. And sometimes there are sort of massive spikes of this effect, and I think we're in the midst of one of them. This coronavirus situation is bringing up everyone's repressed gunk and emotional, energetic baggage and the stuff we don't want to look at. And basically, life is holding up a sacred mirror for all of us to see who we've been and who we are and what we're hiding from ourselves, so we can come into a state of greater wholeness and integration. So a hypothesis of mine is that from the perspective of Earth or Gaia, or the kind of Gaian immune system, nice to see you, Gibby, joining us. From the perspective of the tremendous intelligence of Earth, the kind of Gaian immune system, the coronavirus situation, as well as the mounting social and ecological and spiritual crises on planet Earth right now, are basically signals and a kind of wake-up call, alerting us to the sickness of our civilization and the need for fundamental change. So it seems to me that we are basically being summoned to undergo a collective phase shift, a rebirth into a new form of global civilization that is rooted in a new paradigm of consciousness. We could say it might look something like a regenerative, eco-harmonious, permacultural, omni-compassionate civilization rooted in unity consciousness rather than separation. So basically, humanity has been, for several millennia, kind of exploring the depths of a story of separation, where we see ourselves as separate from each other and separate from the earth, and we act and we build civilization based on this paradigm of consciousness. And this leads to a lot of dynamics based on separation, domination, exploitation, trying to conquer and control nature, endlessly kind of fighting amongst ourselves. And it seems to me that we're now reaching a point where we're kind of coming up against the logical conclusion of that story, which is that the story becomes self-terminating. Our current mode of existing on this planet has become unsustainable, and we are moving toward, falling off a cliff if we don't discover some means of rerouting or course correcting our civilization. So, and a really key point, and yeah, so again, to reiterate, basically my sense is that the coronavirus crisis and just the mounting crises that we're experiencing on Earth at this time are all sort of mirrors and signals from the higher intelligence of Gaia, the higher intelligence of the cosmos, basically indicating to us that the old is breaking down, the old is no longer sustainable, and that something new is wanting to be born on this planet. Some sort of phase shift or paradigm shift is in progress. And an important aspect of this to consider is that it's my deep intuition, at least, that the external, everything we see externally on this planet in our civilization, is really just a faithful mirror of our internal state of collective consciousness. The external simply reports on and mirrors the internal. And so as a result, fundamental external change really cannot occur. Fundamental lasting external change cannot occur without some kind of internal paradigm shift of collective consciousness. The internal paradigm shift is more fundamental, and then the external paradigm shift follows to kind of report on the critical mass of new consciousness that has been reached internally. And so as a result, my sense is that the inner work that people are doing, the inner transformations that people are undergoing, are the most fundamental work toward birthing a new civilization that's happening on Earth at this time. Whatever work people are doing to heal and liberate and transform their internal consciousness, to dissolve the sense of separation and remember unity consciousness, remember that they are one with the earth, one with the entire cosmos, that there are no enemies in this cosmos, that anyone who appears to be an enemy is just oneself, one's deeper self in another disguise, presenting to teach one certain lessons. The work that people are doing to remember these kinds of basically mystical levels of awareness that we've forgotten, that's the most fundamentally important work that needs to be happening on planet Earth in order to shift things, since we must reach a certain critical mass or cross certain thresholds internally before things can really shift externally. However, on the other side of the coin, as a critical mass of unity consciousness is reached on planet Earth, a lot of individuals will begin to increasingly feel a call, kind of a summons to actually act from that consciousness and begin to ground unity consciousness on Earth by building the new paradigm businesses and institutions and communities and cultures and artworks and technologies. And yeah, to basically begin creating the external manifestation of this emerging critical mass of new consciousness, to begin kind of carving out the course correction that we're being asked to undergo as a species. And so it does seem to me like we're in the midst of kind of reaching this critical mass, or we're building toward this critical mass. It seems like millions of people, based on my sense of the kind of spiritual and mystical and psychedelic movements that are happening on the internet, and the size of some of the communities and platforms that have emerged, it seems like many millions of people have at least begun having mystical experiences and psychedelic experiences, and have begun to tap into this kind of remembrance of the oneness of all that is, to varying degrees. And so it seems like we're now at a stage where more and more of the people who've been doing this type of inner work are going to be increasingly called to then channel that realization and that truth into external creations, external businesses and institutions to begin grounding that consciousness in a new paradigm of civilization. So, and there's a great Buckminster Fuller quote that resonates deeply on this point. He says, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change things, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. So my sense is that when I look at what's happening on Earth right now, I see a lot of people trying to fight the old paradigms. And I don't want to say that it's not important to have some people attempting to kind of fight and dismantle the old paradigms, but often what I'm seeing in this kind of fight the old dynamic is I'm seeing that it's still coming from an energy of a kind of victim mentality and wanting to point the finger and say, they're the bad guys, we just need to eliminate them, or we need to just dissolve dissolve that structure, or that, you know, whatever it is, capitalism or the patriarchy or something like that. A lot of this energy is coming from a kind of resentful victim mentality that's still based on rivalry and separation, and it seems to just reproduce a lot of the same dynamics, ultimately like the same meta dynamics that it's attempting to overthrow, by just enacting them in a new form. It's kind of the same old monster wearing a new mask. And um and a lot of the people, you know, raging against the old are also not really proposing much for viable solutions for the new, or maybe they're proposing them on a purely abstract level, but they're not actually trying to build anything to demonstrate the viability of these concepts. And so to me, fighting the old is a lot less powerful than actually visioning deeply and beginning to build and ground the new. It reminds me, there's some quote by Bashar, I don't know the exact quote, but he says something about, you don't end war by hating war, you end war by loving peace. Because if you're hating war, you're placing yourself on a frequency of hatred and you're focusing a lot on war. So the chances that war is going to continue to propagate are quite high. Whereas if you focus instead on visioning and loving peace and embodying the frequency of peace and actually seeing no enemies, that's how you break the cycle of war. Which is a good metaphor for what it seems to me that we're being asked to do at this point, at this juncture. And so I really see shamanic entrepreneurs, conscious entrepreneurs as at the forefront of being leaders in kind of blazing a trail to the new paradigm. And so yeah, when I think of the phrase shamanic entrepreneurship, it has several meanings to me. So for one, it's just this kind of broad sense of visionary businesses that are alchemically transmuting civilization in some way toward a civilization that is fundamentally rooted in a new paradigm of consciousness. And then on another level, I think of shamanic entrepreneurship as signifying businesses that are actually taking the deep knowledge of humanity's age-old wisdom of and modern wisdom of many different types of spiritual and shamanic psychotechnologies and healing technologies, and actually creating businesses that apply these, businesses that create powerful transformational containers that can really unlock things for people and activate things for people and accelerate people's path toward a state of greater healing and liberation and in touchness with unity consciousness. And it seems to me that we need more and more businesses that are that are scaling these modalities and these powerful transformational containers. We need businesses um, that are marketing to new types of audiences that wouldn't traditionally be as pulled to, you know, working with things like psychedelics or meditation or breath work. Um, we just Business is a powerful vehicle for allowing transformational containers and modalities to reach a wider audience. So that's another thing that comes up. Another thing I think of when I think of shamanic entrepreneurship is entrepreneurship as a spiritual path or as kind of a warrior path. And this is, I think, another aspect of shamanic entrepreneurship is kind of alchemically transmuting our vision of what business is, because I think um, a lot of us, especially in the spiritual communities, there's a pervasive kind of allergy to business and business and wealth are kind of viewed as um, aspects of the matrix or the bad guys that we somehow need to overthrow or something like this. And I don't think I don't think this is useful at all. I think actually it's really pivotal at this juncture for us to realize that, at least in the current mode of human civilization, business is really the most key vehicle by which shit actually gets done in the world, and by which shit actually gets built in the world. Um, and so it's really time to relinquish this spiritual allergy to wealth and business, and realize that we can transform business through consciousness. Business can be a vehicle for our truth, and business can be, yeah, a vehicle to manifest aligned wealth, aligned abundance, and then use that wealth and abundance to actually create more projects for the greater good, for the upliftment of all beings on the planet. Um, and without wealth and abundance, you know, it's really hard to build anything. You need resources to build things on the planet. So this is a key thing for us to realize at this juncture. Um, and yeah, as a bit more on entrepreneurship as a spiritual practice and as kind of a warrior path, entrepreneurship is truly something that will confront you with very rapidly with a lot of your deepest stuff, your deepest resistance, your self-doubts, any self-worth issues, any levels of shadow resistance, shadow self-sabotage, procrastination, um, patterns of, yeah, distraction and addiction that are blocking you from stepping into your full power. If you want to like confront all those things super directly, a really powerful way to do that is to become an entrepreneur. So this is part of how entrepreneurship is being reframed within my mind, and I really think it's time to reframe it in the wider spiritual consciousness psychedelic communities as well. um Another point I want to mention is that I have a deep sense that part of this kind of shamanic entrepreneurial revolution or renaissance is going to be the creation of civilizational test tubes. I really have a sense that we need more eco-harmonious communities, and even like eco cities, eco villages, seasteads, you know, whatever types of alternative communities and um uh yeah, cultures that we can create that can act as test tubes for testing out new ideas, good ideas, wherever they may come from, transcending the traditional political spectrum and just saying, hey, look, we're going to take good ideas wherever they come from, and we're going to test them on a smaller scale to attempt to create the most kind of utopian mode of civilization that we can at a small scale, and then you know, attempt to scale up whatever works. I see this as being really pivotal in the coming times for gradually actually empirically demonstrating and mapping out that more beautiful modes of civilization are possible. It's and then I kind of have the idea that as this is done, and as we innovate more and more beautiful modes of civilization or modes of human social organization on a smaller scale, I have a sense that some will start to innovate certain ways of being together that are so beautiful that they can't be ignored. Let's say they're just so appealing and beautiful that they can't be ignored, and so they kind of catch on a broader scale. It's kind of like the notion of Elon Musk with Tesla deciding to build a more eco-friendly car that is just so beautiful and sexy and works so well that it just can't be ignored by the larger consumer market. In order to actually get ideas to spread in mass on this planet, you have to actually you have to make them marketable. You have to demonstrate their value and beauty in a way that people can't ignore. So yeah, I hear the dogs barking in the background. I anticipate that that's going to happen, or I have a sense that there's a strong need for that. So yeah, that's the gist of what I wanted to get through. It looks like we may have a few minutes for questions at the end, but in sum, that's really how I see this moment in history. I do have a deep sense that I want to say that I have a deep sense that in this evolutionary process of being, of which we're all a part, everything on the deepest level is always fundamentally okay. The essence of all that is, I personally have a deep sense of there being kind of an infinite intelligence, an infinite consciousness that permeates all that is sort of the most essential, the fundamental, the absolute, in which everything we see or seem is kind of operating within this fundamental substance or essence, and everything in every moment is in its proper place. So I think, when we think about human challenges, it can be very overwhelming, but it's really beautiful to just remember that we're part of an evolutionary unfolding, and it's literally ever changing, and to really attempt to start to open oneself and to connect to a sense of trust, a sense that you can actually trust this process, you can trust what is happening. My sense is that everything in this world of form is ever changing and evolving in these great cycles of sickness and healing, delusion and enlightenment, forgetfulness and remembrance, death and rebirth. And we are the one consciousness of all that is, basically in many different disguises, exploring its infinite possibilities in this way. And it seems to me that we incarnated on earth at this time to basically witness and steward this earthly transition from a time of being deep in forgetfulness to a time of gradually coming into remembrance, from separation into unity. So that's my sense of what's happening. Everything's totally okay on the deepest level, but we're being invited to play a truly legendary game of leveling up human civilization. So thank you everyone for listening. It looked like we had a question in the chat. We got 5 minutes here, so if anyone else wants to post any other questions or unmute yourself and ask a question, you can do that. Mark Stair says, can you provide some examples of organizations doing this? Yeah, so there are quite a few new paradigm businesses that come to mind. I think immediately of Soltara in Costa Rica, this ayahuasca center, as a really beautiful example of a new paradigm business. I think of Synthesis, the retreat center in the Netherlands, working with magic mushrooms. I think of Flow Genome Project, Flow State Collective, Neurohacker Collective, Psi X, high existence. Yeah, Earthship biotexture, open source ecology. Um, yeah, projects of this nature. I could make a much longer list, but those come to mind off the top. Um, Trevor says, thanks for the great talk. You're very welcome, brother. What do you think is the best first step or first few steps in becoming an entrepreneur? Yeah, so I think the fastest way to cut through the noise and bullshit when it comes to entrepreneurship, because there's so much you can get distracted by, is to really, really deeply ask yourself, what are the greatest challenges that I have overcome in my life, and how might I be able to support other people who are going through similar challenges? Um, that's really, especially when it comes to a path of transformational or shamanic entrepreneurship. If you're attempting to create transformational containers for people, your superpowers in that regard are going to tend to derive from the greatest challenges that you've overcome in life. So you can ask yourself, what have I overcome? Can I support people in something similar? Um, you also want to ask, what really makes me come alive? What activates me? And how can I be sure that that intersects with what I'm doing? And then from the get-go, the most core things to focus on as an entrepreneur are, who is my audience? Who is the specific group of people that I'm trying to reach and help? What is my offer to them? What is my product or service that addresses a very specific, particular problem and helps them get from point A to point B from um, using my solution? And what is my core message? How can I channel a radically honest soul truth message that is really going to resonate deeply with my core audience and is going to just signal to my future soulmate clients that I am the one who is innovating a certain type of medicine that is going to allow them to overcome a challenge similar to the ones that I overcame in the past. So that's the essence, I would say. Sophia says, I really resonated with your talk and the points you made, particularly about creating a test tube community to try different ways of living together. Is this something you're personally working toward? Um, it's definitely something. It's definitely something that is on my radar. I really like to keep an infinite possibility space and not lock myself into particular directions, because I want to allow for maximal emergence. But it's certainly on my radar. Um, Pachamama in Costa Rica is one community that I have spent some time at that I really love. That is a certain type of test tube community of this nature, to cite an example. But yeah, I will just say for now that it's possible, but I'm not gonna say for sure on that. Mark says, check out joinseeds.com, Foundation for Regenerative Economy. Build your solutions and get paid through the system. Sounds cool. Awesome. Thanks, Mark. Gibby says, I think the way we do business needs to change. Companies need to be completely transparent, and we as consumers should demand it. As consumers, we should talk with our feet and our wallets and stop supporting bad businesses and support companies doing it right in the correct way. Well said, my friend. Well said. Yeah, so I think we're about out of time here. Tanya, did you have a question? Did you raise your hand? Okay. All right. Well, I think that about wraps it up. Thanks everybody for joining us, and yeah, namaste. Wishing you a lovely existence.